So today I want to show you a few techniques that I got from the Moog Mavis Synthesizer. And I know you might think that it's a relatively simple synthesizer, but there are a few ideas to learn from this little device. So here I have an empty polygrid patch, and we will start with the basic setup. So again, on the Mavis, we have an oscillator going through a filter, and there's an envelope controlling the amplitude of this voice. So in Bitwig, I will use in this case the pulse oscillator. Right, this will go through a filter. Of course, I will use the Moog type 1. And then we have an envelope controlling the amplitude of this voice, and this will go also to the output. And this is the simple setup that we will build upon. I have here an ARP that I will use also to sequence this voice. So this is how it will sound like. Right, I will get rid of the key tracking, maybe add some stereo detune. Take the resonance down. Right, and maybe change the envelope a bit. Now the first technique that I want to show you is mixing modulation sources. So on the Moog Mavis there is an LFO that we can use, right? We can use it for modulation, but not only that, we can also choose to mix both the LFO and the envelope. For example, here on the filter, you can see we have the mod mix, and we can mix between the envelope generator and the LFO, sort of blend between them, and this can yield quite interesting results. So in Bitwig, I will start by adding an LFO. Right, I will set it to Hertz, so it's unsynced, and I will also disable here the retrigger, so it's just freely running. And now I will use the blend module. I will use once the envelope, right, the envelope signal, and once, let me move this here, once the LFO, I will name this also envelope generator and LFO, right? So now I can blend between them, I can mix between them, and I would like to control the overall level of this modulation source. So I will use also an attenuator. Right, this will come after this mixer, and I will set it to be bipolar. So I can not only reduce it or not only attenuate it, but I can also invert this modulation source. And I would like to modulate the cutoff control. So first of all, I will call this filter just so we know what it's about. And to make this more visual, just so we can see better what's going on, I will use the modulator out module, right, to modulate the filter. We have also the input here, but if I use the modulator out, right, just like this, we can better visually see what's going on. Right, so I can add, let's go for now just to the envelope side. Right, so I can add the envelope. Right, but now I can start mixing it with the LFO and have a look what happens here on the filter. Maybe I will zoom in a bit. Right, so now it's the LFO and the envelope together. We blended between them, mixed between them, and now have a look here. The envelope goes up and down according to the LFO. Right, maybe I can take the LFO a bit down. Right, so we have much more movement coming from the envelope and mixing it with the LFO. Right, so this is the first idea. Another interesting technique is using a wave folder. So on the Mavis, we have a wave folder, and it has a dedicated input, so we can use various signals, right? And we can also fold the LFO and get unique modulation shapes. This is a great technique to experiment with for all sorts of interesting rhythmic results. Right, so in Bitwig, I will use the wave folder module. Right, and I will send the LFO first through the wave folder and then back to this blend module. Right, and let's also look at it on the oscilloscope, right, just so we can see what's going on. So this will be after the folder. You can see for now, we get a triangle wave. Again, this is the LFO. Right, and now I can start folding it and have a look what happens to the shape. Right, we get a unique modulation source. Let's have a listen to this also. I will use just the LFO. Right, so now it's not folded, but now I can start adding the wave folder to this. Right, you can hear The unique result, and again, this is just a triangle wave. I can also try a sine wave and have a look here what happens. So we get something a bit more rhythmic, a bit more unique than just a sine wave LFO. Right, so this is another technique you can use. And the next one is also connected to the wave folder. So on the Moog Mavis, we have two inputs. We have 1 and we have 2, right, that we can use to mix modules or to mix voices or to mix signals. You can see 1 plus 2. And again, something interesting to explore is to mix the oscillator with the LFO and then run it through the wave folder and get sorts of pulse width modulation like movements, also with shapes that don't have pulse width modulation like the triangle wave. So first of all, in Bitwig, I will exchange the pulse oscillator in the right-click menu. I can just change it to the triangle oscillator. Right, I will disconnect the LFO from the wave folder and connect it then directly to the blend module. I will take the wave folder here down. Right, and now I will use a mixer to mix the oscillator, right, directly from the oscillator here. We'll take it out from the filter. To mix the oscillator with the LFO, I'll take the LFO for now all the way down, right, and then send this, I don't know why I took the wave folder here, send this to the wave folder and then back to the filter. The wave folder I can take all the way down for now. Right, and again, I'm sorry I removed it, but I will use another scope just so we can see what's going on. Right, change this to pitch. And for now, I will remove this detuning here just so we get a steady signal. Right, so we have a simple triangle wave, but now let's see what happens when I start mixing in the LFO. And again, this LFO is still at lower rates, so we will not hear it. It will just offset the triangle wave. And thanks to the folder, it will not go above or below a certain point, so we will get PWM-like sound. Right, so again, I'm just mixing in the LFO, the actual LFO, and have a look what happens. We start getting movement. The LFO will push this signal up and down. Let's make this bipolar, so it pushes it up and down. Right, and when it hits the threshold of the wave folder, it will just be folded back, and we get sort of PWM-like movement. Right, and let's have a listen to this also. Let's remove this modulation for a second. Right, now this is not the same as to modulate the wave folder. Have a look what happens when I start modulating the wave folder. Right, we get totally different result. Here it will just be a sort of like a pulse width modulation type of sound. Right, I can of course add also wave folding. Maybe change the shape even a bit. And even though it's not a pulse width, it's not a pulse wave with pulse width modulation, you can still get this nice movement. Look at all this movement. Right, without and with. And the last thing I want to show you is the sample and hold. So again, on the Mavis, we have here the sample and hold input, and by default, you can see it's set to the VCO. So by default, it will sample the oscillator. So it will not be random, but rather connected to the movement of the oscillator. So again, in Bitwig, I will use the sample and hold module. And as the input signal, I will use the oscillator directly from there. And in this case, just because we can, I will use the gates from the sequencer, from this arpeggiator, to trigger the sample and hold. So I will use the gate in, right? And this will go and will trigger the sample and hold. And let's use this also to modulate the filter cutoff. So again, I will just use another modulator out, just so it's more visual to see what's going on. Right, and let's play this for a second and use this to modulate the filter. Right, now if you listen carefully, you will see that it's not really random, but it's more repetitive, and it will follow, let's say that we want a triangle wave. Right, it will follow more the shape of the oscillator because the oscillator is not random. And these are the 4 techniques I wanted to share with you today. So again, mixing modulation like envelopes and LFOs, then folding modulation with a wave folder, mixing audio with an LFO, sending it through a wave folder for PWM like movement, and then using the oscillator as an input signal for sample and hold to get more repetitive results. I hope you enjoyed this video and you will experiment with these ideas. Thank you for watching. Cheers.